This week, Ken Dunham from Qualys is with us to discuss effective operational outcomes. Then in the security news, air gaps are still not air gapped, making old exploits new again, chaining exploits for full compromise, patching is overrated, S-bombs are overrated, and VPNs are overrated, getting root with a cigarette lighter, you can be any user you want to be, in-memory Linux malware, the Internet Archive is back, we still don't know who created Bitcoin, unhackable phones, and there's no security backdoor that's only for the good guys. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. It's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Quick question. Do your end users always, and I mean always, without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question. Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1Password. Coming to you from Purgatory Studios in semi-high definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself, this is Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 847, being recorded on Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. Mr. Larry Pesce is to my left.
What?
What's up, man?
It's good to be here. It's been a crazy week.
What do you got? Did you say you have Vietnamese moonshine?
Yes.
Wow. I have to say, I've never had Vietnamese moonshine.
So I have a friend that many years after high school, we kind of lost touch, and turns out he moved to Vietnam to go teach English.
Make moonshine.
And then effectively retired, was back in the States last summer, and brought gifts for everyone. And we met for dinner, and he brought a whole bunch of stuff because like stuff was super cheap in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Brought name brand sunglasses back that he paid like $1 for.
Nice.
And brought Vietnamese moonshine, and it's been kicking around and like, drink it here.
Why not?
And it comes in the greatest of containers. It's in a Vietnamese Sprite bottle.
I almost just opened it up and took a big swig of it.
Do you know how many times we've almost gone to the refrigerator? Oh, Sprite. Hong
no.
Chong Tian Huh?
No, not Sprite.
No, that is not Sprite.
Mr. Bill Swearingen is here with us. Bill, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I'm glad to be back. It's been a few episodes.
Bill's drink is also amazing, or at least his koozie.
True. That is true. I am rocking a Raisin Hell 1980s koozie at the moment.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Love it. Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. Josh,
hello.
Welcome.
It's always a pleasure, and I'm happy to be here, man.
We just found a picture of you from ShmooCon 2008.
ShmooCon 5.
Yep.
Oof.
ShmooCon 5.
Oh my God, seriously?
Skinny Marpet.
There was that's what Larry said that. He's looking skinny Marpet. I'm like, dude, that's just wrong.
Yeah, I was probably 40 pounds lighter back then.
Yeah,
I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
I've been there.
You've had a couple of kids since then, you know.
Yeah, the pregnancy was rough on my body, okay?
Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
It's good to be here. Nice to do a segment one for a change and see everybody. And I suspect that photo is also Marpet has hair, right?
No.
No, didn't have hair then either.
No, I haven't had hair since...
I keep growing through the top of mine, so, you know.
1998 was the last time I had hair.
This was after that.
So about the same time as Bill's koozie came out.
Yeah. So we're excited to have Mr. Ken Dunham here with us. He is the Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence for Qualys. Ken, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks. Glad to be here.
Nice to have you. Ken, I guess get started with how you got your start in information security and then how you came to land at Qualys.
Yeah, well, in '89, I had a virus and it corrupted a file, and that made me upset. And I've been doing viruses and responses and all of that ever since. So that's kind of how I got started. And it was just a passion of mine. It wasn't really a a field for it at the time, but it came about pretty quickly, by the time we got into the 90s and later. So that's what I've been doing. And then at Qualys, I specialize in cyber threat intelligence and counter defense. Really, a main job is to demonstrate that we're defended against our prioritized threats. So it's not enough to do red team, as you know, or purple team, but you really have to drive it home in operations as well.
Yeah. We have similar responsibilities in our respective roles for the companies that we work for, Ken, which is nice. I like spending time looking at the threat landscape and going, all right, what do we do with this? How do we defend against it? How do we detect it? How do we either fully weaponize it for research purposes and that kind of stuff. So, of course, the Qualys research team is always busy discovering new things and evangelizing some of the threats that are out there. Ken, the most recent one I think the Qualys team uncovered was the regression SSH vulnerability. Is that true?
Right. Yeah, that was a big one that we did as original vulnerability we discovered and disclosed here this last summer. And it was pretty significant because, one, it's SSH, and a lot of people had those externally facing, and it impacted hundreds of thousands of devices all around the world.
And SSH just continues to be obviously really popular, but also not without its flaws. I think HD Moore spoke at Black Hat and DEF CON about a different set of SSH conditions and vulnerabilities as well. So it's nice that your research team is constantly looking into that software that we all know and love, right? They've got a storied history now of looking at things like sudo and other popular projects. So what was the response like with Qualys, Ken, in your role, I'm assuming with your customers and partners to kind of deal with, what the threat is and how do we operationalize the defense against it?
Yeah, well, at Qualys, we went through and did the responsible disclosure, typical deal, right? You understand it, you work with the vendor, you get a patch. We made sure we did the disclosure at the same time that the patch was released. So there wasn't any inappropriate disclosures ahead of time, that sort of thing. So there wasn't any chance for weaponization and that people could patch and make it happen.
Can
on the
I
Qualys side,
I have a question about that. So when you disclose to an open source project, obviously they want to push the fix and test the fix. Do they do that privately in like a private repository? And then when, the day comes for disclosure, that's when it gets pushed to the public repository, or does it differ per project?
Yeah, well, in the world of responsible disclosure, right, it varies based on the organization you work with. I didn't personally handle that for Qualys, so I don't know the exact details of that, but I know from having done the responsible disclosure when we invented that at iDefense at the turn of the century, it very much varies with each organization, right? They all have their ways that they want to play the game and what they're going to do or not do in terms of how they work with you. And some organizations will work with you more flexibly than others, and some things you can control in that chain of release and some things you can't. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So it can get a little frustrating at times with the shared responsibilities that come with that, but that is how it goes. But in the end, right, you want to have the core things, which we did, where we were able to achieve this, which is make sure that you can understand what it is, you can get a patch, and that we have the ability to protect and defend before the bad guys are able to get it and weaponize it.
Especially with something as internet facing as SSH, I have my kind of leniencies in vulnerability disclosure, where sometimes I'm like, I think we got to push. Cat's going to be out of the bag. We got to put, but in other cases, I'm like, releasing it now would just mean chaos, and that wouldn't be doing anyone any favors. So, we need to hold this back and keep it under wraps until we can get patches out. And that's, again, the responsible thing to do, right?
Yeah, I think this one's interesting too, because putting on my CTI, my red teamer, hacker hat here that I've done for 20 plus years, SSH, like, why are we still putting that out on the internet? Why are we not changing the architecture so that 100% across the board of all your connections should never be there? Like, you shouldn't be doing telnet and SSH exposed to the internet at all. Force them to come into the mothership, VPN in, and then do whatever in a trusted zero trust type architecture. Change your architecture so you don't have that type of external exposure, period, and you can control it. That's a way better way to architect and completely limit your attack surface right off the bat. That way, if in this case here, when this vulnerability comes out, you immediately can say, hey, we have 0 external facing attack surface. Awesome. Our risk just went way lower, right, compared to having something that's external facing. And then what are you doing to check just to make sure somebody didn't accidentally turn that on, or some admin's like, oh, I need to pop into a box, or, are you actually checking even though it's supposed to be against it? It's kind of like, well, we don't allow Wi-Fi, but do you ever check to see if somebody turned it on or you have rogue Wi-Fi? How do you know unless you're checking? And then the other issue we have, like when we released on our blog, is the data we collected at the time through our True Risk department was 14% of vulnerable facing instances of OpenSSH that we saw were end-of-life versions of OpenSSH. Ouch. So we got a lot of EOL and things that shouldn't be in production anyway, which is a whole another massive issue of risk, in addition to the fact we've got architectural challenges.
It's interesting, enterprises have at their disposal many different ways to do the VPN thing. But even smaller organization, like I use Tailscale, and I think I'm still on the free tier. Like I almost feel bad. I almost want to just like give them some money because it's a great service. But once you implement that correctly, there's no need to have any exposed ports to the internet for things like remote access or maintenance or monitoring or anything like that. It's all just within your Tailscale, VPN, and it works great. We didn't have that before. I feel like we go back in time, Ken, you've been in this industry for a long time as well. VPNs were a pain in the butt back in the day. Like it was some serious engineering effort to just stand up a VPN, right?
Hey, I remember the first time I hooked up a BPS modem. 2400 BPS was a big deal back in last century, right? It's different today.
The problem is then it became easy to deploy VPN. So everybody did it, and then they just left it right there.
Yeah.
That's in that exact same, the state since.
Set and forget and universal commands. Yes. I love it.
Oh, you're making it hurt. Oh my God. It's like, what's this? It's the VPN. What do you mean the VPN? Well, everybody just uses it. When was it last upgraded? Upgraded?
Upgraded? What are you talking about? That means downtime.
I'm sorry, you can't have downtime to do that.
Oh.
Well, more importantly, you work remote now, so you have to upgrade it while on the VPN.
Right.
Here's the urgent upgrade notice I just sent you on email. Click here.
Ken, I want to go back to a phrase that you used called attack surface management, right? I believe you uttered that phrase, or at least alluded to it. My first question is, did Qualys have a solution to do like what we would call attack surface monitoring or management today? That's incorporated in your stack, right?
Yeah. We do security risk management. We're not just vulnerability management anymore. We've arrived. We just got done doing our QSC Americas. It was pretty cool, and even the groups that were there, the industry analysts and others, were recognizing that as well, which is pretty cool. So we have, I think, 28 there. I'm not even sure how many products we have now. I think it's 28.
Yeah, it's quite a few
compared to what we had just a few years ago. And threat feeds integrated, and we have CSAM for complete inventory. And now we just came out with the ROC, which is phenomenal, which is this concept and actual capabilities to do your risk management in the cloud. And it's not just our stuff, but you can bring in a suite of a whole bunch of other solutions and have a single pane of glass to do true risk management. And we have an insurance partner you can partner with. So as you bring down your risk score, you get lower insurance rates.
No, that's pretty wild. With attack surface management, I wish more people would do it properly. I mean, it's clear by the breaches that I'm observing. It's clear by the data that's being presented when we find a vulnerability in some product and we go to Shodan and we say there's X number of these, exposed to the internet. That's indicative to me that not enough people are doing attack surface management properly, right? There's the attack surface monitoring piece, which you can run and have something go scan and find everything that's externally facing. But you have to act upon that to close down those flaws, to really call it management, have a process for it. Ken, what's your sense, are not enough people doing it? Why aren't people doing more proper attack surface management?
Yeah. Well, when I'm at a cocktail party, Paul, I usually stand by myself when I feel alone. because when I talk attack surface management, nobody knows what I'm talking about. That's why.
Yeah.
It's a whole
That's
different
not
way
why,
of thinking.
Ken.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please stop being personal. Hey, I took a shower today, man. Back off. All right. So, but
Is
it's
that
a whole different
unusual
way
for
of
you?
thinking. Yeah. Oh, this is not the Savage Show. Last time I checked. So, but it's true, right? We as geeks, and especially as you get into the world of CTI and you start to talk about attack surface management, it's a different way of thinking. And a lot of us talk about risk, but really, like I've done a lot of Fortune 100 consulting, and I can't tell you, every single time I get into the boardroom, there is a lack of unity. Like if I was to go in and say to every single person on this call today, how do you define risk? What does risk look like to you? We're still going to come up with diversity. And it will take a little bit for us to come to a point of unity. I guarantee it. Okay. And the same is true in our organizations, and in large organizations, even more difficult. And so security is actually really, really hard because there's the people factor, and we all have our own biases and our own ways of looking at it. And so attack surface management is tough. It's not just about the bits and the bytes of, hey, do I have this exposed? Is this external? Like we've got this whole thing of attack surface management at Qualys and remediation and identifying your blind spots, but it's also about criticality in your assets and how you put risk in on top of that, and then how you do the operational orchestration on top of that. It's that GRC component that you need to put in there. And there's a lot of people that don't know how to do that very well, is what I have found in the world of consultation. So you really need to be able to do both together, and you need the tooling first to create the enablement of it, but you need people that need to know how to do it, and then you need unification within the management layer, and that is rare.
You also need the maturity to know that that's something that you even need to know, right? So, like, I think that there is certainly a curve of scale, like the larger scale companies understand that this is something that we need to know, and then before that, nobody even considers that until they get hit, right? And then after they get hit is when they know, oh, we need to be doing all of those things, right? So I think it's also a maturity thing that gets them around.
Yeah, or they're forced to do it post-breach, right? Like now you're under the microscope, now you have to do all these things and meet all these framework and compliance things because you need to prove to us that you're not a problem or whatever. And usually the companies that get hit are the most secure 18 months later because they've been forced to do all these things to prove how great they are.
So, but I want to make sure our audience is clear what attack surface management is and the actions that you need to take. Similar to vulnerability management, you can't just have some tooling going around discovering all these exposures and vulnerabilities and not really doing anything about it, or not having a solid process to act upon those results, but then also rechecking those results. This isn't just a point in time thing. It's a continuous activity that you have to bake into your processes. And I think what I hear you saying, Ken, is that that's where it falls down in many organizations, is the development and maintenance of that process and those policies within the organization.
Process? What is this process crap you keep talking about? Who does process?
This is why we drink on the show. Yeah, Qualys has an attack surface management risk and assessment and remediation service that you can ask about online and dump into. But, it's all about identifying where are all those blind spots, where are you exposed, and mapping it back to your assets. I've never been in a company where they've had a CMDB or an asset management where like, hey, I know where all my stuff is and I actually trust it. I've seen it where they've had a database where they're like, I don't trust it. And that doesn't work. If you don't have something you can trust, you don't have anything that's actionable. And I need to know what the assets are, and I need to know the criticality of the assets, and I need to know where they're at architecturally. Okay. And then I need to have actionability put into that. That's what Qualys does with our CSAM product and our, attack surface management solutions. It's all integrated. So then you can do the risk management on top of that. That's why it's a risk management solution. And we bring all the CISA catalog remediation and prioritization and other components on top of that to weaponize your defense and your remediation. Yeah, we make it easy for people to do their jobs, essentially.
I think priority is important, but I think reducing your external attack surface, to me, kind of carries the same criticality. Like, I almost at that level don't care how critical the asset is. If it's exposed to the internet and it's running a vulnerable version of SSH, that needs to be closed down, right? That externally facing kind of ticks up the criticality in my mind for those assets.
That tailoring of the scores is really so important. I can't even tell you. And I apologize for breaking in, but like seriously, the fact that it's Paul, you had perfect as it's an externally facing. Oh my God, there's a medium, but it's externally facing and open to the internet. Now it's a critical. The tailoring of the scores for the realization that if you chain a medium, so it's a medium, but it's able to be chained, and so we need to elevate this and all that kind of stuff. There's so many different ways that tailoring the scores is so important. And I'd love to hear more about it.
You're absolutely right about that. That is the hard part of making sure that it's accurate for your risk, that it is correlated exactly to our true risk. That's why we call it true risk at Qualys. But I'm going to change the narrative a little bit here, Paul. I think that it's important to recognize most of what we're talking about here is tactical risk management. But in order to be effective, there's also strategic risk management, which people inherently understand. And then there's operational risk management. And you need all three of those in order to be effective at driving the needle. So when you talk about like, hey, this SSH thing is a problem, I had mentioned previously, like architecturally, like, hey, why do we even have any of this stuff exposed externally? And when you talk about attack surface, well, strategically and operationally, what if I decided architecturally to remove all of this and not have any of it externally facing? I have now permanently moved to the left big boom for my attack surface, and I've significantly reduced my attack surface against all external attacks. And I get rid of RDP, SSH, Telnet, anything that allows for people to connect remotely. And that gets rid of all the automated botnet attacks, the targeted attacks. All the things are happening from Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, others, right? This is a sweet factor situation from a CISO and from a security perspective. Why are we not doing that? Everyone should be doing that. Remove that attack surface permanently. Force VPN, because, hey, it's 2024. This is a way better way to manage your attack surface, and it's way cheaper and more effective than all the legacy solutions we've had in the past. So 1-800 modernize your architecture at a minimum, and then move into zero trust if you haven't been doing that already. And oh, by the way, when you do zero trust, start small and bring in an expert, or you'll fail miserably.
Well, I think it's interesting that, as we lock down that external attack surface, which I wish more organizations would do exactly what you say. It's a like security architecture kind of basics thing. If they're funneling everything through their VPNs, then you can focus on that choke point and go, okay, this is the way in that's externally facing. Now what safeguards can I put on this way into my organization if I've closed down everything else? And what we are observing today is many of those VPN appliances are coming under attack by threat actors because they know it has to be externally facing, and maybe that's one of the only things externally facing. Therefore, they're going to go through great lengths to discover vulnerabilities, but also reuse use older vulnerabilities to get in because people aren't patching them. I'm sure this is probably like grinds your gears, Ken. Like we like to quote Family Guy, the famous scene from Family Guy. This really grinds my gears. Coming from a vulnerability management company, this must really grind your gears, right? The people aren't patching these devices as often as they should be.
Well, how long is this show? Yeah, I mean, I do drive a sports car, and you're talking my language now. So, CISA published a thing on this or two this year as well. And you're right. Yep. This is a focus area, but why is it a focus area by nation state in particular? Because in the world of targeted and semi-targeted attacks, architecturally put on the adversarial mindset, what's going to give me my biggest bang for my buck when I want to go in and I want to surveil you and I want to subvert you and I want to do reconnaissance against you, to study you and steal secrets from you, or see what's going on inside of your network. I want to own your network primarily. That's the main thing. So if I can go into your VPN and the backbone of your network, route switch, that's what I want to target, right? So clearly VPN and routers all day long. And you might have heard recently there was also a public news release of how China went after the telcos in America and successfully subverted those, right? Well, what are they doing? They're not just getting in there to see who you're calling. They're going in there to listen to the calls. They're going in there to subvert and or spoof or take over the calls. And I've known about this for a very long time due to my interesting past and some of the things I've done. And it's very common. This is not the first time this has occurred. This is a very public case of multiple telcos that were published in the Wall Street Journal in particular that were targeted for a very specific reason that hopefully all mitigated by now that it's public. But this is what's been occurring over the last year. Now, what that means is, let's put on our hat as a consumer. If you haven't thought about this in the workplace, it means that in our workplace, we're all worried about encryption, right? Why do we worry about encryption? Because we're worried about people eavesdropping or sniffing our traffic if they're inside our walls, right? But we don't think about that when it comes to our reliance on our public infrastructure, like our phones. So you need to start thinking about that. When you're on a phone, you're trusting your carrier. And whether you're managing that device or not, you don't control the carrier, okay? So in the world of spy versus spy, oh, that was a great comic strip, by the way. I mean, I love that. I wish we had more spy versus spy, right? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. We need to realize that the backbone of some of these public networks are not secure. And we should not be relying on those.
So, I'm sorry, did you say some?
I said all of them.
Good,
100%.
just checking.
I corrected myself. Thank you. So, cheers to you, Josh. Yeah. So what we want to do is we want to make sure everything's encrypted end to end. So instead of having sensitive conversations, passwords, or other things that are shared over our cellular devices, or executives talking and having sensitive M&A conversations or whatever over their phones, what should they be doing? They should be having conversations in encrypted end-to-end channels that we control in our, enterprise. Like go to Teams, WebEx, or something like that. It's password protected and it's encrypted and you're controlling it, you're monitoring it, and you can see who's in there. Those are the things that you need to be doing, and you need to be explaining this in ways that they understand it. Why? Because we can control that and we can encrypt it end to end.
Yeah, I'm actually starting to see Signal starting to become much more well known by what you would call the normies, right? And I think that so I completely agree with you, Ken, it's generally something that people just don't even consider when they're looking at their threat profile. But I do see that the normies are starting to understand end-to-end encryption.
No, don't tell my middle schooler and all his friends that Signal is end-to-end encrypted and you can have disappearing messages, because right now they're not using Signal and the parents can look at their phone and look at the whole history. And I almost hesitate to tell them that, hey, hacker friend Paul can tell you how to protect.
I guarantee you they already know about Snapchat, so don't worry about it.
Oh yeah. Snapchat is the one that they use.
Evil.
For that.
Don't tell them. Yeah.
No, I completely disagree. Give them those tools and wouldn't you love it if, so we were very fortunate that our lives were not recorded, right? We're all of that age, right?
Yeah.
We're all, and
not
so
members of the fishbowl generation. Yes.
There are 3 or 4 people in my life that don't want to have disappearing messages, and it drives me crazy. So my default setting is 1 week, 1 week, right?
Bill always set disappearing messages on all of our signals.
Yeah, because what do we need it for after a week? That there's no.
I want to send you a bunch of memes right now, Bill.
I know. I want to go back and find that
fun.
meme. I guess I got to save the memes as they come in. That's what it is.
No. It slows down your devices. It's data that you don't need. Get rid of that shit, right? And so we need to be teaching our kids that there's no reason to hoard data because data wants to be free, right? So let it go.
Larry's grabbing his laptop. I like hoarding data.
On that note, for attack surface, Bill, you bring up a great point. We shouldn't have, 5 years worth of email.
That's
and
right.
we shouldn't have data stored forever. There should be some, like in a SIM store environment, we only store things for 30 or 90 days or whatever the core requirements are for meeting regulatory and compliant requirements. And then we get rid of it as soon as we can, or the bare minimum is encrypt it because we don't want that exposure. Like if an attacker comes in and you've got 10 years worth of emails, that's called 10 years worth of really bad news for you. Because now they're going to weaponize 100% of that against you.
There's so many
all those
cases
contracts, everything.
There's so many cases I've been on where they almost say it with pride. How long do you store your email?
Yeah.
Forever. We store it for what?
Uh-huh.
No. Like,
Be like Bill.
Get rid of that right now. And be real jerks about it. 90 days, right?
Well,
perfect.
You can't just say don't store email a long time.
Yeah,
you have to teach them that email is not the system of record.
That's true.
If you want it, because there is stuff I wish I had from 20 years ago, because it would be really useful right now to have it, and it's gone.
Yeah, but when you have an email compromise, and the answer is, what data was in there? Or the question is, what data was in there? Everything, right? Like every document that's ever been emailed to my CEO, every like that.
What are you deleting each week here, Bill? That's what I want to know, because now you don't
want to know.
He couldn't tell you.
My God, no, please don't ask him.
Yeah.
Here, let me pull it up real quick.
Bill's claiming a fifth every week here. That's what I'm getting out of it.
Yep.
I know a lot of people that actually have bots that follow them on like Twitter. This used to be, now it's other platforms, but 3 months or whatever after a tweet is sent out, it auto deletes it and puts random nonsense in there. And the same thing on Reddit, the same thing on other platforms,
right?
Just so that you can't be caught saying something stupid or whatever. You can never be confronted with your own words later down the road.
It's a good strategy.
Bill likes it.
Because I say a lot of stupid shit.
Yeah, I guess I've known Bill long enough. This is no shock to me. Ken, I want to go back to, I think it was something that actually Bill was bringing up about, or Josh, chaining vulnerabilities. So we've got a lot of these scoring and tracking mechanisms for vulnerabilities today. We've talked about them on the show quite a bit. Where I think there is a gap in our thinking about how we prioritize and classify vulnerabilities is the chaining of vulnerabilities and associated exploits. In other words, if we see a CVSS 10.0 that's remotely accessible, we're going to go, oh my God, we have to go fix that right away. Drop everything, go fix it. But if we see something that one vulnerability is a 6.2 and the other vulnerability is a 7.3, but together it's really bad, right? It's, one vulnerability, it requires, this level of privilege, but the other vulnerability can grant you that privilege so you can exploit the other one. Ken, how are we doing today in being able to set prioritization for not just one vulnerability, but a whole set of vulnerabilities, because together they're a 10.0?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. And I think that we're struggling, because I'm going to actually avoid the question on some level transparently, because here's what I've observed. I think most people don't even do the block and tackle of basic vulnerability management, let alone risk management. I'm just going to call it out. Like, okay, those are complex. And if you take a 6.0 and a 7.0, but you put them together, and now it's really an 11, even though we're still on a 10-point scale. I mean, it's bad news, and we need to patch it yesterday. Everybody knows that's ever done risk management. That's how that goes. And sometimes you get that, and you need to have the ability to do your risk management and triage that stuff against a few variables and do it quickly. That's what we here at Qualys are trying to help people to do with our proprietary true risk management and our ROC system and all of that. Make that easy for people, because there's only about 5% of the stuff you really need to care about. Okay. Let that sink in. Okay. We're busy being busy, and we're just patching, but there's an 11-day window out of a 30-day typical Black Tuesday month where we're getting attacked by the bad guys. Patch comes out, bad guys develop exploit, and then they attack for 11 days before we patch. That's what happens every month. Okay. And same thing for Red Hat and everything else. Patch comes out, the same old cycle. There's an 11-day window there on average where they are attacking before you patch on average. Now, if you just had the 5% that you cared about of external facing, most important assets, and you got that 5% right, and you patched against that, and that's 5%, that's not that much. And you just got it right every single time, and you nailed it. You would now 100% of the time reduce the majority of the risk that matters most to you every single time. That's what you really need to do. And I would say the very large majority of organizations just don't do that well. I've gone into Fortune 100 organizations. I've seen over 50,000 high and critical vulnerabilities in their backlog in production. I've seen it where we've gone in and there's vulnerabilities and they can't physically even roll the patch because their hardware is so end of life, they're not even capable of rolling it. Okay. I've seen it where we're in SLED environments and it'll take 3 years to do the role updates. That's ridiculous. Okay. There is so much accepted risk that we have right now on the block and tackle of the basics. People are struggling. And what I've seen, I ran a global shop for this, for lots of very large organizations around the world, is they are drowning in data. They're drowning in dashboards. They can't keep up with the sheer volume of diversity and depth of information. We have so much stuff coming in from so many different places. We don't even know how many apps are on our phone, let alone in our devices, and so much diversity and what's coming in or if it's configured properly. And I can barely keep up with my spreadsheets and my emails.
But a lot of the threat actors are out there today, not necessarily focused on vulnerabilities. Sure, they do use vulnerabilities, but there's lots of classic stories and reports from a whole wide variety of both red teamers and observable threat actors that people are going, they're not really exploiting known vulnerabilities. Some are, but for the most part, they're taking advantage of weak credentials and misconfiguration. Is that?
Absolutely. Yeah, when I also ran a global pen testing group as well. And a big part of what I would regularly exploit that was very common for us was especially the world of API and SaaS and cover your SaaS. That'd be my answer. Because what did we see? We saw rapid adoption into hybrid environments. And then we'd see people say, we're going to do zero trust. And then zero trust was an epic fail. They didn't know how to do it. And then they chose to do it too big. And then you're like, we're going to accept this risk for this legacy thing because we'll zero trust and we'll transfer over. But then instead of it being a year, it's going to be a 5-year deal. So now for 5 years, they're wide open. And it's just a nightmare. And so right now, we're in a nightmare situation for a large majority of organizations. This is not public knowledge. This just is how it is for a lot of places that did really bad digital transformations. And they're in this legacy digital transformation that has gone way south. And there's a lot of people moving around. And now where we're at is it's a mess. And they've got all these different connections. And how many different SaaS providers do you have where you have no idea how they're connected, if they're secure, if the configurations are proper? Have you seen the Swagger? I mean, you have no idea.
Bill, you had a comment? Question?
Yeah, I'll actually move on. So so you kind of had that rolling. That all of that data is coming in, but they also have all that technical debt. Is all I was going to add. That's one of the things as somebody who's managed an enterprise scale, actually a telco, and so I was a little upset when you guys were both like, all the telcos are hacked. Come on, man, give me a break. But
but they are, Bill.
No, they're not. And
yes, they are.
No, they're not.
No, Josh, you don't have any evidence of that. Come on,
right?
Now.
I'll pull up the articles.
Well, not now. So, anyway,
Watch
it doesn't matter.
He deleted it a week ago. It doesn't matter.
There certainly is something here around we can't expect, there's got to be a good analogy somewhere in here, maybe your car's tires, right? Have you ever looked at somebody else's car's tires and you're like, oh my gosh, you should have replaced those 20,000 miles ago, right? And what are you doing? I don't want to spend $1,000 right now, right? There's got to be an analogy to that because, companies are made to, they're built to make money, right? And so there certainly is a business trade-off so one of the things, Ken, you mentioned that really struck home for me, and I agree with you, is that these systems have been out of life for 10 years, right? Not out of support, right? Out of life. They've been out of support for 15 and they should have been end of life 10 years ago. How did this happen? Well, I'll tell you how it happens, because it's still making money, right? It's still making money. I don't want to replace it as a business owner. And so one of the things that you mentioned, again, as you were talking, completely agree with, is a lot of people are accepting a lot of risk. And I think the issue is they don't properly understand the risk that they're accepting, right? And so, and I think, that's probably what you were trying to convey. said, and you probably said it more succinct than me, and I should have just let it go. But
I think it's great to reinforce it, right? Is that we make these decisions years ago. Like whatever decisions were made during COVID and rush to cloud, or decisions to accept some solution because we can't upgrade it, it's too expensive or whatever. Say that was made 2 years ago. It might have been made with different managers, right? Now here we are 2 years later. It may or may not even be in a risk register. We may or may not have that kind of governance process in our company, but it's accepted and it's there. And now it just kind of is. It's the status quo. And nobody questions it. Nobody looks at it. So the management layer of how are we managing that? Who's really looking at that? Who's questioning status quo? That's not cool. Nobody does that. Okay. That's a cultural thing. That's a bias thing. And that's a human thing. That's a very big deal in the world of leadership. So if you're a CISO leader, you need to step up and start questioning that.
So when you say cultural, what do you mean by that? And I'm not picking on you. I'm just interested.
No, it's a great question.
Yeah.
The different cultures all around the world. So I've set up shops in lots of different countries as I did all these different intelligence things. And the United States is very different than the UK than it is in, say, China, as it is in India. And these different cultural groups have different ways of dealing with things. Some cultures, like America, are more direct. Other cultures are more sect-based. Some are more religious-based. Some, they have different ways that they tend to address and confront and work with these types of solutions. And you need to understand what that is for your company in that particular working geographic area. And you need to be sensitive to that. And then you need to figure out what it is for that. I did consulting for a large automotive company once, and they had different subcultures in different working areas. And it was very challenging for them to have unification because they didn't have a way to work it together. So we used a framework, the NIST CSF, to bring them together towards a common language, right? To unify them towards common language, common goals, and to overcome some of those ways of thinking or denying or, oh, this isn't a problem or whatever, right? To get them all on the same page.
So one thing I thought was really interesting, I may have mentioned this on the show before, but I've never really understood how the rest of the world views Americans. Like this one instance I had, we were doing a tabletop exercise that was comprised of a global audience, and it was being held in London, right? And so the way that it was organized is there were, I don't know, maybe 8 tables that were organized, and the Americans were at one table, and the English, and just whatever. And we got to a point where we were, in the exercise, it was a ransomware of the hotel, and our VIP was in their hotel room, and because of the ransomware, you couldn't open the doors. And my answer is, what are you talking about? You go in there and you kick that fucking door down, and the whole crowd, like everybody just dies laughing. I was like, what are you laughing at? And they're like, what an American response. I'm like, I'm gonna get my
That's
guy.
a privacy violation, Bill. Okay, what are you talking about?
Yeah, but we tend to be very direct. We'll go right, like, let's get them right. Like, but yeah, sorry, kind of took us off track there. But I
No,
appreciate it.
but so I wanted to go back to, we were talking about patching, and I think what we're coming down to is that organizations don't do enough patching, and they're certainly maybe still not patching the correct things. I don't know if you know this, but I used to work for Tenable, right? And I think you and I hopefully we're in a better position, but I'm kind of hearing that maybe we're not. When I was at Tenable, people would be like, well, don't tell me about all those patches that I'm missing and do a really great job of that, because then I have to fix it. And I'm like, isn't that the point? That we tell you where you're missing the patches so you can go fix it, right? But that's a piece of the equation. The other piece of the equation is, what about misconfiguration? I've been quoted as saying misconfiguration leads to compromise. And so, but if we're not patching the right things, are we not doing enough configuration management to be able to configure and harden our devices? So we're still in that space. Like, I understand the products. I actually helped build out the configuration auditing within the Tenable product line, and I know Qualys has an outstanding offering there as well. But what I hear, you're already confirming, Ken, The people aren't using that effectively in organizations today, which concerns me.
That's the number one thing that I attack as a red teamer with my red team. And when we strategically go after Fortune 100 in particular, we're going to be looking at their APIs, their API integrations, their swaggers, and their configurations, especially in the cloud. That's our number one area of opportunity and identity access management. So, yeah, you're right. And Qualys has an offering, Total Cloud, and other solutions within that exactly for that. And it's all integrated into our ROC, which we just released here at QSC America. So that's exactly what that's for. So that in one place, you have the ability to do your patching, all your CSAM, identity access, and inventory management, and all your configurations, and bring it all in, managing in one place, and get lower insurance. That's the beauty of it. Yeah, because you need orchestration business outcomes. And like what Josh was saying earlier, Joshua was talking about, hey, we need the ability to be able to get to like, what is actually my real risk here? And to chaining vulnerabilities, like, all right, when we put these together, this is not great. This is really, really bad for us, Us personally, this is a 10 out of 10 here, even though it's a CVE severity of XYZ, the risk for us is unacceptable. We need to, everybody's staying late tonight. That's what we're trying to do, is tell you, hey, this is the one you care about. This is the top 5%. So you can then get to the point where you say, this is one we're going to emergency patch on and spend them. Because I used to make those decisions back in the day when we invented responsible disclosure. We had a company where it was $1 million for them to pull the trigger. And this was 20 years ago. It was $1 million to do emergency patch management at the time. It's expensive to do it, right? But here's the answer. You need to prioritize, and almost monthly, you might need to do emergency patch management on the race conditions, because we know that's how fast these guys can reverse the patches and start exploiting. So if it hits a critical asset, you might need to emergency patch management every month.
Yeah. Are people ready to hear that?
No.
Yeah, okay. Because actually, that's been part of what I've been going through my head as I think about, people seem to be more buzzword attained. In other words, I moved it to the cloud. I got rid of my infrastructure. And if you say, so how'd you secure it? Or is that just my bias? I mean, I get the sense you've seen a bunch of that. What can we do about it?
Yeah, we shifted liability, right? We're good to go. I don't know how many people have told me, oh, my backups are all in the cloud. I'm like, okay, but did you test them? Have you ever tried to do a backup? You should be doing that every month. If you've never demonstrated that you can do a backup, how do you know it's going to work? And fingers crossed when you get to a disaster, because I'm not going to wait for ransomware to hope it works. I'm going to make sure it works.
Or how about, I got this one person who knows how to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and he's on vacation, or he just quit, or my bad.
I feel like we're kind of doomy and gloomy. I was going to go to incident response, and when you detect something,
how about this, Ken? Tell us a nice thing. Tell us something interesting that's going on.
Yeah. Is there anything
I just got back from vacation. I caught a bunch of fish.
Nobody cares about you.
Fly fishing is fantastic.
Tell us something in
you were
business
eating well.
That's going well. Tell us something that's awesome about your product or the company. They gave you a free bonus, and we're all going to get one.
Or better
right.
yet,
tell us
about a customer that, or an organization that you're like, wow, they're doing it right. This should be a model, right? Because I feel like we've kind of talked about organizations, all the things they're doing that is leading to all of these compromises and breaches, right? Let's talk about what are companies doing that's good.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think companies that are doing security right, from the top down, recognize their actual risk, and the board members get it. Now, obviously, in the board, it is about making money, but they have a communication with the CISO that is a money-driven conversation, but they're able to translate that properly. The problem we've had over the last 5 years is that CISOs got into the boardroom, but then they told them all about a whole bunch of technical geek stuff that was a complete mismatch. They didn't talk CISO board language, which is money and numbers, and they lost credibility in the boardroom, and they did not speak the right language to the board members. So it's been a travesty. But the companies that are doing it right, they know how to speak the language of business in the boardroom, and they are risk driven. And so what they're doing is they're saying things like, we had a slide up at our QSC that was really great, and it showed like, here is our assets, like the $634 million pod and the $400 million pod and all these different pods and how high a risk they were. And then we showed the actual risk we had accounted for each one, and they were inverted. So the higher value the asset, the very lowest risk we had. And as it was a very small valued asset, we had the highest risk. They were inverted with one another. And that's exactly what you want to show that we had risk in all the right places. Like if we get a small value asset, we lose $8 million, we could care less, because over here was $634 million. We care a lot about that one. Okay. We don't want that one to get owned. And that's a huge deal for us, because it impacts all of our business lines and our reputation. So you're managing your risk top down, and it's truly your risk, like your numbers and your business and your investors. And you're doing that from a frameworks driven perspective. And most importantly, I'll put on my CTI hat for a perspective. You're doing it against your prioritized threats. Do you know who your most important actors are that are impacting your organization? And can you prove it? Can you go into your logs and actually show that they're attacking you? And then how are you defending against them from a TTP's perspective to demonstrate that you're actually hardened against them? And how are you actually impacting your roadmap and your infrastructure to make sure that you're actually defending?
I really like what you're saying there, Ken. But one of the things that's going through my head is I keep running into people aren't there, like they can't get the basics right. Let's get some multi-factor. Let's get some. It doesn't matter who the threat actor is. If you've got reusable passwords or an unencrypted data stream, it's a script kiddie. Game over. So how do I get those guys that can't get the basics up to the point where they could start identifying their threat actors and risk better? I mean, how do you bootstrap them aside from slapping upside the head?
Well, we all have holes in places we wish we didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
I used to run a framework shop as well, where we do readiness assessments, and I'm a big fan of those. I think like the CIS is a great way to start. NIST is a good one as well, but the CIS is more tactical with the way that they've changed the CIS 18 with the new scoring there. And if you're not familiar with that, critical information security framework controls. When you become a framework-driven shop, research shows that you're going to be more effective, more cost-effective, more efficient, and you're going to be able to holistically manage your risk. More importantly, you can come up with a roadmap. You can say, look, out of our 18 different domains, here's where we're strong, here's where we're weak, here's what we need to work on. And now you're starting to govern and make decisions on where we need to go. So you'll know where your holes are. I've heard people say, like in a crisis I was dealing with recently with a company that dealt with ransomware, they're like, well, we didn't have any security till last year. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's what you thought. And then you had this incident, right? But where is your security? How do you actually measure it, right? That's where these frameworks come in. And you can actually tactically measure each one of the domains, and then you can see. And when you go through that process, you go through governance, which is even more important. And I've done that with CISOs. And like one CISO I had, he thought everything was important. And he was used to being a hero. And that's great when you're a small shop. But after they've done M&A of lots of different companies, it became unwieldy. And I forced him to pick his top things. And it was really painful for him. But he learned some really important lessons going through that. And then we helped him. And then we used the data and the framework to help create new priorities for him. And he had a little bit of a perspective change because that framework allowed for him to realize, oh, wow, I'm not near as mature in some of these places that I thought I was. This is unmanageable for me. I need to rely on my framework and my people. I need to do things different now, and it can't be hero mode anymore. So I think frameworks are a great way to move in that direction, but it is a leadership question.
Do you have any opportunities to go back to customers you've helped like that, whether in Qualys or in a past contract, to see if they've continued to progress, move up?
Yes. I've done some consultation, and often when I help clients with like incident response, you're supposed to do lessons learned at the end. And what I tell them is, let's do lessons learned. One of the things I do that's unique with my business is I'll do lessons learned with a framework like a CIS 18, and we'll layer on their lessons learned from the actual incident and breach coupled with their initial framework. And nobody else in the industry does that. And that's our differentiator. And then we then use that as a way, like when the iron's hot, to say, here's what you really need to work on right now based on how you got pwned. And that's a major game changer for them to move them and propel them forward. And often they don't have policies, procedures, tooling, configurations. We clean all that up for them real quick in partnership with them. And in 6 to 12 months, they are a shiny new awesome. And they have learned their lesson, and they've done something with it that was specific to their incident. And they come out of it with a framework-driven awesome. In other words, they've restored and they've moved to a new level of hygiene that's usually around the CMMI level 3, which is pretty impressive in a short period of time.
Wow. Cool.
Ken, we just have 5 questions left for you. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I finished my drink. Go for it.
There you go. There's no right or wrong answers, and we don't judge you until after the broadcast. So, Ken, 3 words to describe yourself.
Funny, smart, sincere.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Nice.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
A book about myself? What would the title be?
Yes.
Perseverance.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
Oh, Matrix, hands down.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Well, that would be Demi Moore and I can't think of the other guy's name. I'm not good on celebrities. Mel Gibson. There we go.
There you go.
All right.
Very nice. Ken, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Yeah, thank you. That was fun. I had a good time.
Absolutely. With that, we'll take a short break and come back with the security news. Stay tuned.